I lived on the third floor of an old five-story building. Apartments here were rarely rented out, and the residents were mostly permanent, polite, and quiet. But in February, a new neighbor moved in, below me on the second floor. A man in his 40s, thin, with short hair. He introduced himself as Alexei. On the first day, he knocked on my door, said hello, and said that he would be happy to meet me. He looked like an ordinary person, a little withdrawn, but not aggressive. The first 2 weeks were quiet, but around the third week, I began to notice noises at night. At first, I thought he was just doing repairs after work, creaking, dull thuds. But they didn't happen during the day, only between 1 and 3 in the morning. Sometimes it was a crash, as if something heavy was falling on the floor, followed by sudden silence. A minute or two later, footsteps again. And so it went, several times a night. By the end of the month, a strange smell had joined these sounds. It came from the ventilation in the kitchen and was very heavy, a mixture of burning and something rotten. In the evening, I went downstairs and knocked on his door. Someone was clearly in the apartment. I could hear footsteps and the quiet sound of the TV, but no one opened the door. The next day, I ran into him in the stairwell. I asked him directly, "Alexei, are you frying meat in there? It smells really bad." He smiled and replied, "Yes, meat." I overcooked it a little and quickly left without even asking if it bothered me. The smell, however, continued the next day and the day after that. Then I talked to my neighbor on the fifth floor. She said she had also heard noises at night and was now afraid to walk through the stairwell after midnight. One night, the noise became so loud that I woke up in a cold sweat. It sounded like he was dragging something across the floor and then throwing it with force. I grabbed my phone and called the police. The patrol arrived in about 20 minutes. The officers knocked, but Alexei didn't open the door right away. Through the half-open door, I saw one of the policemen grimacing and the other whispering something to his colleague. They went inside and asked me to go back to my room. Half an hour later, they came out and said only, "There are no grounds for arrest. If it happens again, call us." Alexei looked calm, but he was staring at me too intently. After the police visit, the noise stopped. The smell disappeared as if it had never been there. Sometimes I didn't see Alexei for several days. In early April, he moved out. No one saw how. One day, the door was locked with an old, rusty lock, and the apartment became quiet. A couple of weeks later, I ran into one of those police officers by chance. He said, "Listen, it's better not to get involved in that case. Just be glad he moved out." I never found out what happened those nights, but now I only sleep with the door locked. I rented a one-room apartment on the fourth floor. Across a narrow corridor lived a woman of about 35. She had moved in recently, and my first impression of her was quite normal, friendly, and neat. The first few days, we exchanged brief hellos and good evenings, but soon I began to notice something strange. She often stood at her door, as if listening. Sometimes, when I opened my door, I would catch her doing this. She always explained that she was waiting for a courier, but she had nothing in her hands, and I didn't see any boxes at the door. One morning, when I was on my way to work. Her door was ajar, and I could hear quiet whispering coming from inside. I slowed down, but didn't stop. One evening, I saw her standing by the window of the entrance hall, writing down the license plate numbers of cars parked outside the building in a notebook. "I'm counting cars," she said. "I want to figure out who lives where." It sounded strange, but I didn't argue. A week later, the neighbors started complaining that someone was anonymously reporting improper parking and noise to the management company. Everyone suspected her, but no one had any proof. Late one evening, I accidentally overheard her whispering my name and address on the phone. Then I had no more doubts. The next day, I knocked on her door. She opened it with the chain on. "Are you following me?" I asked. "It's none of your business," she replied sharply and slammed the door shut. A couple of days later, I received a letter complaining about unlawful use of the apartment. I realized it was her doing. I called the police to at least record the fact of harassment. The officers talked to her for about 10 minutes, but as expected, found no violations. They advised me to install a camera in the peephole and record everything. At the beginning of the next month, I noticed that her door was ajar, but the apartment was empty. A neighbor from the same floor said that she had moved out at night, loading her belongings into a taxi. After she left, the complaints stopped and the building became quiet again. To this day, I don't know why she was collecting information about the residents, writing down car numbers, and making phone calls at night. Now, when someone new moves in across the hall, I always try to find out a little more about them than just their name. After my neighbor moved out, an unusual silence descended on the building. It seemed as if everything had returned to normal. No more letters, no more complaints, no more strange conversations at night. But I noticed that some things were starting to disappear. The first thing to go was a package that had been left at my door. A minor thing, but still annoying. I thought maybe it was just a mistake by the delivery person. But a couple of days later, my neighbor on the 5th floor complained that someone had been taking her newspapers and packages. I started paying attention to new faces in the stairwell and asked my neighbors who had recently moved in or who was often in the building. It turned out that several unfamiliar people had been coming here, but no one knew anything for sure. One evening, on my way home from work, I saw a woman in the hallway, a young woman in a dark coat, who quickly put something in her bag when she noticed me. I asked who she was, but she replied indistinctly and hurried away. This made me suspicious. Although the neighbor across the hall had moved away, the atmosphere in the building had changed. A new anxiety had appeared, as if someone was still watching and controlling everything. And I realized that sometimes, even when a person leaves, it doesn't mean that all the problems disappear. Thank you for watching this video to the end. If you liked these stories, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like it. This way, you will support the creation of new, realistic, and interesting stories. See you in the next videos, and be careful.